Welcome back to Analysis, where we've been discussing this week's student protests at the University of London. Media coverage of yesterday's student action has focused on the number of anarchists who broke down a gate at London University's Senate House, while largely ignoring the peaceful march which involved most protesters. In a change of tactics from the previous week, the police did not move in to clear the protest or enforce the court injunction banning such action. The university itself has stated that it has little alternative in the face of increasingly disruptive protests and sit-ins, with Chris Cobb, the university's chief operating officer, stating that this is a regrettable but necessary that we have taken in order to prevent the type of violent and intimidating behaviour that we've seen at protests at Senate House recently. Well, remaining with us to discuss this is Sam Dathi, who's an organiser of the Student Assembly Against Austerity, Feyzi Ismail, who's a lecturer at SOAS, Maham Hashmi-Khan, who's an officer at the University of London Union, and Areeb, who's Vice President of Academic Affairs at King's College. So, Maham, what do you make of the police tactics here? Because they clearly decided to do something very different yesterday than they did the previous week. Do you think they thought, OK, that kicked it off, we hadn't better repeat that?
I think they were really clever, and I wouldn't be surprised if they were knocking on Theresa May's door today asking for more money to police protests. It was quite perplexing because there were points where people were, you know, blocking police vans, and the police vans were literally turning around and going away. But it also shows that when they want to, they don't be violent, so that when they are violent, they're told they're allowed to be violent. So this whole idea that, you know, police are just doing their job on Wednesday and Thursday, well, they might have been just doing their job, but they were like being told to arrest and beat people up, whilst yesterday when they were told not to beat people up and to completely not engage with any protest, any student protest anywhere in London, they backed off every step of the way. Students got to Victoria and back, going past Buckingham Palace, and at no point...
Because some people have pointed out that they've said that actually the previous week they weren't provoked, but they might have argued that they were provoked yesterday.
The police were provoked.
Well, you could put an argument that what was happening the previous week was a peaceful sit-in which took no action that would provoke the police, whereas yesterday, I mean, people were burning bins and so forth. So it's a kind of paradox about how they behaved.
Well, I mean, in terms of the police weren't, like, the students weren't provoking the police at any point yesterday or the days before. I think what you see is political policing. The police decide when it's in their interest to police something and when they don't want to police something. So I don't think that yesterday's protest was, let's provoke the police. I think it was a peaceful and sometimes not so peaceful, but absolutely like an assertion of our right to protest. And I don't like the dichotomy between anarchists and students. Those were students. They might be anarchists, but they're also students. And for us to divide ourselves into little groups isn't of benefit to anyone else. We're angry at the same things. We might manifest our anger in different ways, but we're still fighting for the same cause.
I think it's also important to point out here that the anger and the motivation behind the whole Cops on Campus Day of Action and the movement, you can go as far as saying, is the fact that the police were cracking down violently on peaceful protests. Like campuses across the world have been hubs for social activism and social change. And what we were witnessing over the last week was the police and the state, you can go as far as arguing, violently repressing that potential creation of a social movement. And yesterday you had so many organisations, so many students coming together. You had people like who are polar opposites. You can argue, for example, the National Union Students exec to the National Campaigns Against Fees and Cuts to normal students who are really actually worried, because yesterday wasn't just about opposing police brutality, it was about democracy itself, i.e. being able to actually peacefully organise on our campuses, and that's what we were trying to prove. And I think it's fair to say, I think we proved that point, and lo and behold, police didn't get involved, and it was peaceful demonstration.
So have you heard, I mean, there have been some reports of the police might not have been as actively engaged in the demonstration yesterday as they were the previous week, but they're now going around visiting the homes of activists. Is that true? I
mean, there have been numerous reports of the police going and pre-arresting activists who were arrested last Wednesday, Thursday and Friday. So in terms of confirmation, I mean, I'm sure the other
also
panellists...
activists from Millbank. So we're talking about people who graduated or getting on with their lives in different places, being asked to go to police stations and talk to the police.
This is from people who were involved in the previous wave of student activism in 2010 are now being
knocked on to see what are your plans for tomorrow on the Tuesday night.
Feyzi, do you think that one of the things that happened there was because the police stood back, it's now allowed a kind of chorus in the press to be mounted saying, well, they aren't doing enough. You know, I mean, in a way, it's allowed the story to be reversed from last week. Many news organisations have shown the piece of footage of the student being hit to the ground, assaulted by the police. This allowed a different story to be run in the press.
I mean, I think the main thing about the past week is that the police presence on campus and the brutality have created the conditions under which people are, you know, defending their right to protest, but as well, there's a realization that it's about defending the right to protest, but it's also about why are they here at this educational, you know, in the education system at these colleges in Bloomsbury anyway in the first place. And so it becomes about, you know, what kind of education we want, what, you know, students and staff and lecturers and cleaners and everyone who is involved in higher education at the moment are fighting against, as I was saying, this felt experience of the marketisation of education, as other people have pointed out, and so then when we try to protest and very legitimately protest, we then you know we then come across this police brutality.
And how do you read the role of the university management structure in this? Because it's very unlikely that the police would behave this way unless they were either invited to or unless they knew that the authorities were willing for this to happen.
Yeah, I mean, one of the problems is that the management hasn't been clear about this. I mean, I think that's right. I think they haven't. They should be transparent about, you know, what kinds of negotiations they're having. They say that they hadn't invited the police on, but clearly they are you know, on the space, on the property of the University of London. So the managements of the different colleges should be having negotiations with them to get them off, and if they aren't, that's a problem, and we should know about what's happening.
Sam, is this something that the students' movement is taking up? That it's saying to the university authorities, you're complicit in this. If you were to make a public declaration that this shouldn't happen, it would be very difficult for the police to behave in this way?
Yes, I mean, SOAS, which is the university I went to, has for some time had a policy, a student union policy, that we have no cops on campus, and we've quite strenuously tried to enforce that. And there's been occasions, and I've been involved in some, where police have tried to come on the campus and for students have formed a picket. I remember one particular incident at the beginning of the year where we did this, and we stopped 2 police officers coming in, and then 2 other police officers managed to get in to the reception area, and then all the students came and protested against these 2 police officers. So, yeah, I mean, we make it clear to management that we don't want police officers in our space. This is a student space. This is a space within which we want to express our democratic rights to run our university in the way that we see fit. And management know this, and we don't want police there interfering with that.
Areeb, I mean, you were saying that it's a very organic movement, and it's been described as a leaderless movement, and so forth and so on. But to the degree that that's true, because it's probably not absolutely true, since any movement requires some form of organisation, but to the degree that it is true, is that not also a weakness as well as a strength, in the sense that it may be true, as Maham says, that the anarchists are students, but they are a particular group of people with a particular strategy that might not be agreed with by all the students involved in the protest, but without some kind of structure for deciding we are going to do this and we aren't going to do that, a relatively unrepresentative group of people can shape the protest without any mandate.
I mean, what I will say is, in terms of the actual Cops on Campus day of action and whatnot, that was just randomly called, and people were inviting other people and collectively came together There was endorsements from particular organisations, but there was no actual saying we're taking the lead for it as well. I think what we're going to take away from in terms of the next steps as well is that I think people are going to go back to their own campuses as well to discuss this as well, and on a grassroots level actually begin that discussion around COPs on campus as well, and then tie in all these other factors as well. For example, austerity, the marketisation of education has been discussed here as well. So there is a fair assessment in saying as that it is to a large degree leaderless as well, but that's not necessarily a bad thing as well. And I think it's now empowered the students to really go back to their own campuses, be it not just in London, but in Birmingham, in Sussex, across the country as well, and really start shaping campaigns. Because when the 9K fees came into it, people said, okay, that's the end of student activism, that everyone's going to have this consumer mindset, and to a large degree that is the case. But at the same time, you didn't just have like postgraduates and veterans in the activist world there. You had students who are paying £9,000 in tuition fees who are there as well. And I think this could be the spark of something amazing that we're going to witness for the next few months, even years, across our campuses.
Maham, we've been focusing on events in London, but there have been events elsewhere, Sussex and in Birmingham, and indeed some of the people that were up for disciplinary in Sussex, I understand those disciplinary proceedings were withdrawn. I mean, ultimately, this has got to get to the point, if it's to reproduce the scale of 2010, it's got to get more national than it is at the moment, hasn't it? Yes,
but I mean, the the procedure hasn't been lifted. The Sussex 5 are still under disciplinary. They're just not suspended from school. So there's a difference between,
ending it completely, yes.
Yeah. And what we're seeing time and time again is university managements losing the argument, and therefore then trying to suppress student dissent and student voice by just kind of putting disciplinary action or calling in the police. But what we also saw yesterday was an occupation in Manchester, in Ulster, in Aberdeen. So it is more national than just London, and it is about a wider movement. And the police brutality and cops on campus is just one point of focus, but it's a really broad movement which covers so many things, from the debt, from the sell-off of student debt to the fire stations being closed, or the cuts to the NHS and the cuts to teaching budgets, and just generally. So, yeah, I think.
I mean, Sam, the organisation that you're involved with had a kind of national meeting at what there were 50 plus universities represented. Is that going to be one of the organisations now that tries to generalise beyond the colleges that have already taken action? Well,
I hope so, yeah. I mean, so far we've had fair success with building a national movement, but I mean, it is absolutely crucial that we build a national movement of students up and down the country, not just thousands, not just hundreds of thousands, but even possibly millions, because austerity is a national programme prosecuted by a highly centralised, highly organised, highly authoritarian government. And the only way that we can counter that is not by lots of disparate local activities, which in itself is very good, but we need to unite that struggle and build a national form of resistance. It's the only way that we can win. So we need to have coalitions of students, and students who wouldn't otherwise get involved with protests. I mean, we always have the same sort of kind of radical few, and I'm one of those that you always see at protests in campuses, but that in itself is not enough. You have to see thousands of students who would not otherwise engage in protest getting out on the streets, and the way to do that is by having organisations which seek to build a national coalition.
Feyzi, how important do you think the continuing dispute of the lecturers is going to be? Because in the earlier stages of this, it was the fact that the lecturers already did have national strike action taking place on 2 separate days, and that the students acted in solidarity with them on those days that gave one of the focuses for the action that preceded this. If we're talking about it spreading to more colleges, then, well, the lecturers are already taking action across the country. Is that going to continue? Will it continue to be a focus?
Well, I hope it will continue to be a focus, and I think it's crucial that it is a focus, because I would slightly disagree with Areeb about the question of organisation. I mean, I think you do need a level of organisation, and I think there's sort of hesitation and sort of perhaps confusion over the unions, getting the unions involved, or is that they'll slow us down or they'll dominate our agenda, whether it's the NUS or whether it's the UCU. And of course, we don't want that to happen. But I think there has to be a level of organisation, both both within the unions and with the unions, but also outside the unions. So they're not exclusive. You know, I think we can organise both at those levels. But I think that's the way to sort of make this movement much more systematic and widespread, because that's what we want. We want as many students, as many lecturers, as many people in society to get involved. Education is a public good, and we want that to spread and to spread to the widest layers of people. So therefore, I think we need a level of organisation.
Areeb, I mean, you were saying earlier that you and Feyzi mentioned it now, that the NUS were involved. Now that's something of a turnaround, isn't it? Because I mean, in 2010, the NUS were criticised very severely for being very slow and very conservative about their response to the student movement, but they seem to have got a little bit more on the front foot this time round.
Yeah, I mean, what I will say is, and it goes back to my original point, is that what we witnessed last week was a crackdown on peaceful protest. I mean, when you hear that phrase, crackdown on peaceful protest, you think of authoritarian regime, you think what's going on in Syria in terms of the campuses across Syria. And that's probably I would argue that would be one of the main reasons why the NUS, for example, weren't on the back foot on this and actively came out and condemned what was happening, because there was visual evidence of the fact that the police were committing police brutality, i.e. punching in peaceful protesters in the face as well to clear Senate House. I would slightly disagree with the point you just made, in the sense that the main reasons why people came out yesterday in such high numbers was because for them it was relevant, and that was one of the main reasons.
And what made it relevant, do you think? Which of the issues? Or
I think the main issue was the crackdown on police protest as well, and also the other peaceful protests and other issues that came into it. And one thing I witnessed yesterday, and some panellists might disagree with me, is that you had people from across the political spectrum there as well who may have agreed with cuts, for example, but at the same time came out and showed solidarity with the Cops Off Campus demonstration, because they knew this could be a genuine attack on our civil liberties as students at universities here in the UK as well. So that's one of the reasons why I think yesterday was something special, in that people came out willingly as well, as opposed to being dragged and kicking and screaming as well, because the union called it. And I think the most important thing that, I mean, the unions should be involved. I'm not saying they shouldn't be involved, but and one of the reasons why I would argue that they should be involved is that it does, to a large degree, create a level of legitimacy as well. When, for example, the NUS backed it as well, as depressing as it sounds, people were like, oh wow, this is actually a big issue as well. So that's where I would argue the unions should be as involved.
Sam, how do you read this? What is it that's motivating people? Is it the sort of core issues that we began with talking about, the student loans and the austerity-related things? Is it the reaction, as Areeb suggesting, that now it's a civil liberties issue almost? Where do you think it's simply that people are going to fight on all these fronts?
Yeah, I think it's a confluence of factors that have come together. It's the student loans, it's the industrial disputes, and it's the solidarity against the police repression. I think they've all come together and created the beginning, and I stress that, the beginning of what could be an amazing movement. Now, the point is, how do we turn this bubbling away under the surface into, as I said before, a national movement that can actually take on the government and defeat the government? Now, to do that, you have to work with the NUS. That's not to say that I don't think that much of the political leadership of the NUS, but what I do understand is that the NUS has a massive membership, and if you work with the NUS but you retain your political independence, what you can benefit from working with the NUS is access to countless thousands of students. So we look back, for example, to give a stunning example, the 10th of November 2010, when NUS called this demonstration, 50,000 students came out in the streets, countless students who had never been to a protest before. And they did that because the NUS backed this protest. It was the biggest student protest for decades, certainly bigger than the one in '98 against Tony Blair. So that's what we need to do. We need to.
I mean, Maham, that's right, isn't it? I mean, because lots of people, lots of student radicals are very critical of the NUS. But I mean, I guess one of the issues wouldn't be defending the University of London union if people didn't think that the unions were possible. I guess is what they're defending is the potential, if not always the reality, of what union organisation can be.
Well, I mean, I think there is a massive difference between the University of London Union and the NUS, and the NUS is colluding at the moment with the University of London management in the closure of the University of London Union, because it sees the University of London Union as a thorn in its side. As a rival. And so, whilst, yes, I agree, if people do want to work within the NUS and try to pull the NUS into things, go ahead, do it. I personally have tried for years, and now I give up the NUS. I mean, the NUS I don't think the NUS had a great response to what happened last week. Their response was weak, to say the least. And the people who came down on the protest yesterday, I spoke to hundreds of people, and no one said they were there because the NUS called it. People came because they saw the videos, they saw their friends being arrested, they saw innocent bystanders being arrested, and I think that was more a rallying call than anything the NUS can put out, because the reality is NUS co-opts this membership, which it actually doesn't have. So what the NUS have done this year is they've also taken away the logo of the NUS off our student cards, because, God forbid, we use it to get discounts.
Okay, well, we're just moving towards the end now. Feyzi, where would you go? Because Areeb is kind of saying, okay, well, you know, to get the official union doing something, that's quite important. Maham saying, for heaven's sake, I've given up on that. Where do you stand on that?
I mean, I think Areeb is right. It does give the movement a degree of legitimacy when you have the big unions involved. But I think Maham's point is correct insofar as, you know, you might not be able to, you probably won't be able to change the NUS from the inside, and that's why it's absolutely essential that you organise outside of the NUS. But that doesn't mean you ignore the NUS either. So you have to bring the NUS on board, but you absolutely have to organise outside the NUS, and you have to, you know, create a movement and create a sort of a pole of attraction outside the NUS in which you can then pull it to.
Going to have to stop you there because we're running out of time. But this is the end of the term, but there'll be a new term starting just after Christmas, and I'm sure that we'll be following this story and seeing the fate of this new student movement in 2014. We'll be following it here on Analysis. Do rejoin us. Okay, so